right. Thank you so much for joining us for the first edition of Untold, the podcast. And today, joining me as my first guest is the mayor of Richmond, Danny Avula. He is going to tell us his untold stories. Thanks for being with us, Mayor.
My pleasure, Katie. Great to be here.
Well, I just want to start by saying it's so nice that you've had such an uneventful start to governing our city. I mean, it's really nice that you've just been able to kind of ease into things. No major events have happened.
Just a chill few weeks.
Kind of hanging out, right? I say that as a joke for those of you that are not from Richmond. We've had a little bit of a crisis here. And I'll set it up a little bit. I know that a lot of people know what the water crisis in Richmond looked like. But essentially, you were sworn in December 31st?
Yeah.
New Year's Eve?
We did it for a January 1st start date.
Okay.
But
A few days later, there was a snowstorm in Richmond, a couple inches of snow on the ground. A power outage caused a cascading series of events at the water plant to occur and caused a water outage that lasted nearly a week in the city of Richmond and surrounding areas. It was quite a difficult situation.
Yeah.
Snow on the ground, kids home from school, can't flush your toilets. It was tricky.
yeah, parents were loving it.
Yeah, I'm sure you got so much nice mail.
We also have 5 kids of our own, and the neighborhood decided to send all their kids to my house. And so I actually took pictures of what our kitchen looked like with no running water after probably the 3rd day. It was a complete disaster.
Were they like, Dad, can you fix this, please?
Of course they were.
I'm sure they were.
Although they didn't actually see me for the first, I barely came home for that first 36 hours. So.
Yeah, and you were wearing the same clothes when you did. Yeah. So let's unpack the sort of behind the scenes of what was going on during that period. So we saw all the press conferences. We know all the errors and things that happened before you that sort of led up to what happened. But where were you when you got the phone call, like, Mayday, there's a problem at the water plant?
I was at City Hall and got a call sort of late morning that said, hey, we may be having some issues at the water plant. We probably need to pull folks together and brief everybody about what's going on. And so about 1 o'clock that afternoon, myself, other city leaders all got together, got briefed on what had happened after the outage that morning and what the series of events that took place through early to mid-morning. And then when we realized that, we hopefully will be able to get some of these water pumps and filters back online, but there's no guarantee, and we're watching the reservoir level drop just hour by hour, we decided that we needed to activate what we call the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, and really move into more crisis management, emergency management mode.
In your mind, so you get this phone call. At that point, did you think this is manageable? We're going to work through this pretty well.
Yeah, that was the sense. I mean, what was being communicated was, we've had some flooding. We have some pumps that are offline, but we're working on it. We should be able to get the map back up and running. We've got enough water in the reservoir to last us till about 6 p.m. I mean, again, this was all the information that was coming in real time and changing in real time. And
so you weren't at that second thinking oh my gosh, this is going to be a huge, massive deal. But then, as the hours go on, you realize, okay, this is bad. And then what point do you get to the water plant and actually see what the situation is?
Yeah, so we opened our Emergency Operations Center at about 2:30 that afternoon. And that's the point where we kind of bring representation from all of the city agencies. We actually bring regional partners in. And the idea is that in the midst of an emergency where you're actually managing crisis, you want the principles in one place for just rapid, efficient communication. You want everybody to be able to be briefed on a regular basis, to develop communications that are going to go out to the public. And, having been a public health physician and been in many emergency response situations, that was a fairly familiar place and setup for me. But to answer your question, we launched the Emergency Operations Center around 2:30, and then we're progressing through the afternoon and evening. And at some point into the evening, the sense of, this is something that might be fixed tonight, to, I'm not sure if we're going to get things back online, and there's new issues that are being reported and popping up. And I felt like I just needed to see for myself what was happening so that I could clearly understand it and then clearly communicate it to the public.
Right.
So after our evening briefing around 9 p.m., I went over to the water treatment plant just to get a sense of what was happening, what was the organized response looking like, and like what was it going to take to help get it fixed.
What was it looking like?
I think the biggest issue that got me to go over there, and remember, it was, snow covered, the roads were completely empty.
Like, in my mind, I'm seeing that video, like that like everything in the basement is like it looked like a water park.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like submerged.
Yeah. And
did you see it like that?
No, I mean, by the time I got there, the water had all been drained out, because that's what they had been working on most of the day was getting the sump pumps in, getting all of that water pumped out. And at the point that I got there, I went down into those wells, and they had, the metal casing off, and the electricians were in there trying to, fix the actuators and do whatever needed, drying the machines out. I mean, it was, it was all submerged under about 10 feet of water. And so getting them dry, getting them fixed is what, masses of people were working on. The other big issue was that the IT system that runs the entire operation was offline, and even though it had we had rebooted it, it wasn't connecting to the servers, and so you didn't have visibility across the entire operation to really understand, what's the pressure at point A, or what are the valves operating at points B, C, and D, and so. Not having that clarity was really problematic, because it's hard to
even know how to fix it if you're not looking at a diagnostic tool, right? Yeah. So was there a point of panic, or at some point did it set in that this was going to be, I mean, this is probably one of the biggest challenges of your political career, I would assume, right? I mean, I know you've held other offices. COVID was a pretty big deal.
I mean, at that point, but my political career had been 5 days old. So yes, it was the biggest issue. No, but I will say, Catie, it's a pressure. It's a real... It was. I would say it was a different kind of pressure than the career that I've had, right? I mean, as a practicing physician and actually having been in life or death situation with patients, and then certainly during COVID, the initial uncertainty of what was happening when I was leading the local response, and then the state response when vaccination started. I mean, all of those had a component of are we going to live or not, that made those much weightier crises to manage than this. So I think that yes, it was a high pressure situation, but I think that in most cases people can live without water for a couple days, and it's not to make light of it at all. But I will say the same gravity of life and death wasn't there in the midst of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think to myself about being in that situation. As you said, this timeline keeps kind of shifting on you. Yeah. You know what I mean? You thought it was going to be at first it was sort of this is an unfortunate weather event, and then we sort of learned there was more to it than that, and then. We think, maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, and that goal line kind of kept shifting while that clock is just getting louder and louder. Yeah. And I'm sure you were getting inundated with emails and calls. Do mayors read emails? I need to know that.
Yes, I do read my email.
You do? Okay. Yes. And were you getting people that were just on fire?
Yeah, mostly my phone was just blowing up. Calls, texts, people wanting to know what was going on, from regional partners to state partners. And to just friends who have my number and are like, are we going to be able to go back to school, or are we going to be able to start my business tomorrow? Or
my kids are driving me crazy.
Yeah, right. Yes, I mean, I was getting bombarded with calls, and again, having been through a number of these situations, I mean, the most recent and most sort of applicable had been the COVID response, but none of that felt that jarring to me. And it felt okay, we've got a problem, we've got to solve it. Let's get organized and just do a really good job of communicating consistently to people along the way. And I will say, looking back at it, I probably came out on day one a little bit more reassuring than I should have been. And some of that is just my personality, and some of it is that the information that I was receiving, I really did have a sense, we should be able to get these pumps back up tonight, and this should be a fairly short-lived
That was truthfully
situation.
what you thought
at
absolutely.
That time.
Absolutely. Right, yeah. But looking back, it's when you set those expectations for people, it's hard to take them back.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So I get
under promise,
get
over
what
deliver.
you're
I
saying.
did not do that.
I get what you're saying. Yeah. Well, there's really no no playbook for this, right? I mean, where is the guidebook on how to manage, a capital city that's in a snowstorm that has no water? Like, that's a pretty unique circumstance. Did you just lose your cool at any point in time? I mean, this was a week. So I know you're a calm guy and you've got the calm vibe, but at any point were you like, can we just get this together? Like, I mean, at any point were you like, I'm just...
Yeah, I think when I was at the water treatment plant, not the first night because I was still gathering information, but it was really sort of, I shifted from sort of observer, suggester to take charge, operator.
General, yeah.
But even in that, I think there's there's an importance of maintaining composure in those moments because. And doing that while bringing urgency, right? I mean, there's a balance because if I lose my cool, then the whole
operation
response,
goes.
Yeah.
When you say you slept there, was there any actual sleeping?
No, I didn't sleep there.
Okay.
I was there overnight.
You sat in a chair.
I sat in a chair
and closed your eyes for like a period.
That's right.
Or two.
Yeah. So I got there around 9 p.m. and we were there. I mean, the whole team was there all night, overnight. The morning shift came in.
I talked to your detail. He said he was there too.
That's right. Yeah. So, I think that first evening was a series of, okay, what issue are we trying to tackle now? Let's get organized around it, and then see if that brings the fix. And so it was just a series of efforts to try to bring the IT system back online, which ultimately happened a little bit after midnight. And then once the IT system came back online and connected to the servers, we could see which filters and pumps were where they needed to be. And so all of the rewashing, some of it was electrical issues, replacing fuses, drying out machines, and so.
Yeah.
We just kind of had an organized approach to trying to get stuff back online.
And once the triage of all this had happened and water was coming out of faucets and people were flushing their toilets again, you had this other problem to deal with, which is like the deep dive on the problems that led up to this point, right? This was sort of a straw that broke the camel's back kind of situation. And leadership issues and now moving forward. What is your confidence in this system? Do you feel like there's still a great deal of work to sort of secure the water situation in Richmond, or do you feel like you've got a hold on it?
I think we're in a very good place right now. I mean, after water came back up and running, I mean, we obviously had to do a lot of patchwork, right? We had to bring in backup pumps. We had to do a lot of repair on existing pumps. We had to do some pump replacements. And so a lot of that work has happened. And remember, I mean, this was, 30-ish days ago now. We have not had any faltering of water production since then. Now, we can't sort of operate on this patchwork system in perpetuity.
Right.
But as we gear up for another storm, we both have clearly diagnosed what went wrong for the most part. I mean, we're still working out some of those kinks, but we have a good idea of why that switch failure occurred, why we didn't have backup power supplies in place. And we've addressed a lot of those over the last 30 days. So I feel good about heading into this storm, knowing that we're going to be watching more closely than ever, and that we have practice and have clear protocols for if there is another power outage, what does it look like to shift to backup immediately.
What is your confidence level in the people? Because, I mean, I think that the leadership change at the top certainly indicated that there were things that should have been done that weren't, things that should have been maintained and weren't, decisions that should have been before any power outage occurred, right? Do you feel like the people there really now understand the system and how to fix it, and there's a clear sort of path of leadership coming or in place now? Because, I mean, I think that's where, DPU manages more than just water, and so it kind of calls to mind, are there other things that maybe were neglected? Maybe this is just about to break too, and which just one snowstorm away from that faltering,
Yeah. I mean, I think in the acute setting, I mean, we're not even a full, maybe about a month removed from the event. I think people are on high alert, and we're going to have different staffing models in place. We've already sort of defined different protocols, and so I feel like now is a moment where people absolutely are ready for another event. The question is how are we going to maintain that level of readiness and knowledge and skill 2-3 years from now, right? Because I think in some ways what happens is that when you're a part of a system that the backups work, and because we have power outages on a regular basis, and so we haven't had a significant issue in this particular water plant for over 2 decades. I mean, the last one was Hurricane Isabel in 2003.
How convenient that it just decided to give out in your first
Lucky
week of work.
me, right? But I think what happens when you're a part of a functioning system over time, you just step into a sense of ease, or maybe you're not always practicing and ready. I mean, it happens it's even in my clinical career, right? In the hospital system, you have to keep a regular schedule of practicing, a code, right? And because it doesn't happen often enough, and so if you're not practicing on a regular basis, you lose the ability to respond rapidly and to make sure that you've got multiple systems of redundancy. And so right now, I feel great about the whole team's readiness and ability to jump in if something goes wrong.
Maintaining
but
that
it is maintaining that is the work moving forward, right? How do we build that culture of emergency preparedness and emergency response so that when we have a decade go by and everything's working well, that we're still on our toes? Once
you absorbed the shock of everything and changed your clothes and got a shower and maybe processed the week, what is it that you come away from that crisis with as you move into sort of your first chapter of leading? What do you move through with or knowing from managing? Because it's interesting to me that this doesn't rank at the top of your list for crisis pressure. I mean, that's interesting because I feel like every minute that the city is without water, I mean, it just kind of falls more squarely on your shoulders than maybe, I don't know, when you're in a big position when you're directing health of our entire county and COVID happens, but there's other people that can fall on as well. Yeah. I feel like everyone was waiting to hear every word you were going to say from that podium every time you stood up and hanging on it. Is it 8 hours? Is it 12 hours? Is it another day? I mean, the pressure of that feels heavy to me. But it seems like you didn't. It wasn't a test for you as much.
I mean, again, some of that may just be personality, but some of it is having been through the ringer, right? I mean, I think when I was running the statewide vaccination effort, especially in those first few days, literally legislators, community leaders, people from all over the state were calling. And as we got into periods of time where they couldn't get access to vaccine, that pressure, public health officials all over the country were receiving real death threats. I mean, and it was death threats from...
Did you get any?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I got a number of emails from people who, and this is largely folks who were really against the way that either we were making decisions about who would be prioritized in vaccination, or things got really nasty when, some of the vaccine mandates went out. And I think that just having been through a year of just everything that the pandemic brought and people not being mentally well led to a lot of freedom of people saying whatever they were thinking and feeling. And that was so
yes, I see what you're saying. It was spread out over a longer period of time because this was a week, right? So in your mind, you're probably well, it was a week,
right?
But COVID was a year.
Yeah.
And death threats are a real thing.
Yeah.
So sorry, I didn't get to the end of that question because I think I interrupted myself and you. But the question was, what do you walk away from? This wasn't the height of crisis for you, but certainly you learned something from it. So what do you walk away with after this?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's a resetting of the agenda that I came into this job with, right? I mean, I spent 8 months surveying the community, right? During the campaign, you're knocking doors, you're talking to residents, you're really getting a sense of what people's priorities are. And, I came in really figuring out, okay, how do we make sure that those things stay front and center for us?
And then water probably wasn't mentioned.
No, that's right.
And any of those door knocks, right? And now it's the hot topic.
Yeah, and so I think that the events of the first week and everything that went into our response more squarely put in a few things. One, like really looking at our critical infrastructure. So water, gas, electric, bridges and roads, right? I mean, there are things that that everybody sort of just takes for granted because they generally work. And then when they don't, you've got to really think about, okay, what assessments have previously been done? What investments do we need to make that we haven't for the last few years? And I think, the water plan is a good example of that, where we had seen some previous audits from a few years ago, and I think the deferred maintenance concept is real, right? When you've got real pressing crises in front of you, like the plight of the homeless, you're going to shift money into trying to solve that problem. And things like, oh, that switchgear has been working okay, we can kick it down the road a couple more years. And so I think it just helps frame the conversation around deferred maintenance and why it's really important to continue to make these investments. And it doesn't mean that we're going to be able to do everything that needs to be done. We're a really old city. We have a lot of really old infrastructure, but I do think it changes the conversation about how are we prioritizing those things, and then how do you make the comparison between acute crises and things that could become acute crises.
Yeah, I mean, you probably had to become a water expert overnight. When you were standing up there talking, I was like, how does he happen to know all of these things about, because it is something that you really, I've never heard a politician say, I'm going to tackle, because you don't tackle it until it's actually a problem, infrastructure usually. So that's a good solid
You
point.
learn a lot when you spend the night in the water treatment plant, right?
What was to eat in there?
I missed. I don't think there was any food the first night. On the second night, we just brought some pizzas in. But I think that just the importance of being in that space and actually walking through those wells and seeing the pumps and filters and really like understanding.
I wanted it. I wanted to understand. I was like, can I take a tour? I don't know how any of this works. I mean, I get water out of my faucet, but I have no idea how it gets here.
It's amazing.
So I'm sure it was educational, but also painful. Well, I think we can button up the water topic. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. So, Mayor, in terms of a to-do list, every politician comes into office and they have like things that are right at the top. And as you said, kind of had to shuffle the deck a little bit given the water situation. But I noticed on your campaign website, it said making City Hall more effective and responsive. And a lot of people would enjoy that, I think. A lot of people might not consider City Hall in Richmond historically to be associated with either of those terms. Yes, I was a reporter, so I used to, investigative reporter here for years. So I used to do a lot of, digging around in that space. But what exactly did you mean by that, and what needs to be more efficient?
Every single day of the campaign was a conversation with a group of people, individuals, whatever. But I think every single day there was somebody who had a story of their frustration with City Hall. And sometimes it was an interaction with a particular person, and so kind of speaking to the customer service mentality. Sometimes it was not being able to even find the right person. Sometimes it was a payment that got lost. Sometimes it was a service that got reported in their neighborhood and they just never saw any resolution to. But I think the vast majority of residents of the city had some angst about their interactions with City Hall, and that over time leads to an erosion of trust, right? We spent a lot of money in paying taxes to the city to make sure that this operation is working and doing what it needs to do to provide services to the residents of the city. And I think over time that there's been more and more questions about, is that money being used wisely, and how am I getting assurances that the taxpayer dollars are actually delivering? Right. So I think there's layers to that, right? I mean, there's the layer of just customer service culture, and I will say that by and large, in talking to people in City Hall, like I've seen a lot of really positive things, right? I've seen people who are there for the right reasons, who really care about doing a good job, who really care about serving the public in meaningful ways. But not unlike the conversation we were having about when you've been working in a system and you get a little complacent or aren't practicing emergency response. I think when you're working in a system where maybe you can't always solve a problem or you don't always feel empowered to solve a problem, that can get frustrating over time, and that frustration can spill out in ways that are unhelpful to the public. And so I think there's deep work that we need to do organizationally just to like recenter the sense of public service. The whole reason that local government exists is to serve the residents of the city. And that really is like thinking about motivations and customer service culture. I think there's also an element of empowering people to help make those decisions or solve problems as close to the customer interface as possible. I think a lot of times people feel like, oh, it's in another department, or I've got to move it up a few levels to get resolution. And so we've got some real deep organizational work to do to get to the place that we need to be. And then there's just making sure that some of the basic operations are working well, and some of the ways that people interact with government services are working well. And that's going to require some investments in both thinking through process and in technology, right? Like everybody comes from a world where they get everything on their phone and they're able, every company has invested a lot of money in making those services accessible, usable, a joyful experience. Governments do not do that, right?
Yeah, no, it's rarely a joyful experience if you have to call any department in City Hall. How do you do that, though? Here's the thing. I feel like every mayor comes in and they say, yep, like there's fat to be trimmed and we got to sort of really streamline these processes. And it's really hard to take on City Hall from inside City Hall. How do you do that? Are reductions part of that? Are there too many people working there?
I actually think there's not enough people working there, which is part of the frustration that people experience when they can't get a call back, when we're not delivering services at the level that we need to.
Stretched too thin?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this is, as you have a growing city with growing needs, that you just need more capacity to do the work. I think social service is a great example where our most vulnerable residents of the city can't get timely responses on whether they're qualified for Medicaid or whether they're qualified for food stamps because there aren't enough people to actually process those applications in real time. And when you don't have enough money for food, that feels like that is a crisis, right? And so I think that's one example. But then I also look at the things that actually drive a city's economy, like permitting, right? And the ability to be able to start a permitting process and get a shovel in the ground as quickly as possible.
Full disclosure, I hear about this from my husband. We talked about
sure
this.
You do.
I hear about this. I'm not going to carry his thoughts into this.
No, it's fine.
But yes, I'm glad to hear you mention the permitting process.
Yeah, and I will, I think our director of planning and development really has done a lot to listen to stakeholders and to start to retool the process in the lane that he has control over. The thing is, when you're going through a permitting process through the city, there are multiple organizations that need to touch that. There's planning and development, there's Department of Utilities, there's Public Works, there's the fire department. And I just don't think, I think we have a lot of work that we can and need to do to really bring efficiency to that whole process and to make sure that things aren't getting hung up in the baton handoffs within City Hall.
Right.
So, when you ask the question, like, how do you actually do that from the inside of City Hall? I think first is bringing that group of decision makers together, mapping out our processes and figuring out how do we make this easier for the end user. And I think the end user focus is really important because when you lose sight of the person who's actually coming to City Hall for the service, like that's when stuff gets lost. And so I think really driving at who is the person, who is the entity that we're serving, and how do we make that experience as customer friendly and efficient as possible.
That sounds like a business model.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It absolutely
Do you think you
is.
can run City Hall like a business?
I mean, no, because the rules are different, but I do think we can be customer focused in the way that businesses are. And when I say the rules are different, I think the commitment to transparency, right? Businesses don't have to RFP things.
Right.
Businesses
don't have to show us what you spend our tax dollars on, but you guys.
So there are things about the rules of government that make it inherently less efficient, but that doesn't mean that our people can't be customer friendly, and it doesn't mean that we can make we can't make process improvement. We absolutely can, and we need to. And it, like our ability as a city to thrive depends on that, right? If we can actually take months out of a permitting process, that's months of tax revenue that come to us sooner, right? And so
Right.
there's
a benefit.
absolutely,
Yeah. It's a real. Really quick, because I hit on the efficiency thing right off the bat, but water obviously is now a priority to be focused on. Efficiency and responsiveness in City Hall. If you had to list like one or two more that you think are front burner, not back burner, like want to do this as soon as or as quickly as I can.
Yeah.
What other two or three
Affordable
issues?
housing and school investments. I mean, those are the top two by far items that came up during the campaign, is just the frustration of people who can't afford to live in their community. And I think this is not a Richmond-specific issue. This is an issue that's affecting our entire country, right? Over the last 20 years, average rental rates have increased by 30%. And so it's every town, every city that is desirable is seeing those increases.
Right.
And
part of Richmond's charm, I think, initially for people that come here is like, oh, it's so affordable. It's so easy. Like it's not DC. I'm not dealing with those kind of prices. But now we kind of have a lot of the amenities of DC. We have, when I first lived here, there was like one choice for sushi. I mean, this is always my benchmark. How many sushi choices do I have? And when Richmond suddenly has like 10 sushi choices, I'm like, are we still the same? We're a bigger city now. Like there's more options, but housing definitely is, and what I paid to live here, when I worked at the station, you can't even, you can't get a closet for that price. You know what I mean? So affordable housing and then schools.
And schools, right? I mean, I think that we still have this dynamic where younger people will move in, they'll get to a point where they're thinking about having kids, and then they're still uncomfortable with the quality of the school system, And I think some of that is a public relations issue, right? Like all of my kids have gone to Richmond Public Schools and have done really well. And so I think we need to be helpful to Richmond Public Schools in telling the story more effectively and really encouraging people to keep their kids in schools. At the same time, historically, Richmond Public Schools has served a very low income population, right? The percentage of kids that we serve that are economically disenfranchised is much higher than a lot of other school systems. And so that does take more investment, right? It costs more to be able to provide all of the needs that schools increasingly have been dependent on, whether that is food, whether it's mental health services, whether it's case management, whether it's transportation, right? Like all of those things are things that are being layered on the schools. And I have a lot of insight just because my wife has worked in Richmond Public Schools for 2 decades. And she taught at Henrico, she taught in Albemarle before that. And so we've sort of had different vantage points of the needs of a student population. I would say probably across most cities and counties in Virginia, we're seeing the needs of students increase and schools being dependent on more and more to meet them.
Got it. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, Mayor, now we're going to get into the fun stuff, which I most enjoy. Some of your personal thoughts and experiences. First off, do you have a sort of daily mantra or motto that you live by? Like when you were in the thick of it in the water plant, was there something that you were coaching yourself with to get through? Is there anything like that comes to mind, or not really?
I mean, people who know me well will laugh at this question because I'm not. I don't do a lot of self-reflection. That isn't a discipline that I have adopted. But I do think I'm very compelled by doing the right thing, by being really people-focused. And I think what draws me to medicine, what draws me to this work in public service is really trying to, from a justice perspective, address things for the vulnerable members of our community. I mean, that has always been a heartbeat, and I think what drew me to, like I said, medicine in the first place, and ultimately public health and broader public service.
Yeah, I obviously don't know you all that well, but your personality seems, at least from how the management of the water crisis was going, and you mentioned this yourself, to be somewhat optimistic and positive. Is that sort of guiding principle part of the, I don't know, I don't want to say mantra, but I definitely think every time you got up there, I could tell you really wanted to give us good news. Like, you really wanted to tell us it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know he wants this for us. I'm not sure if we're going to get water today, but I do feel like positive spirit kind of comes through. Is there anyone politically that you admire or model yourself after? I know that this is, like I said, a short political career so far in terms of leading, but
I mean, politics is not where I thought I would be. I mean, this certainly just all came out of left field for me. And I think that probably the class and sort of people focus of Barack Obama was the first time that I saw a politician that I was like, oh, like that's the ethos of society that I really that like
admire.
Grabs me,
right?
But I mean, people don't normally look to politicians as beacons of a community. I mean, there are lots of other types of leaders. I will say that somebody who's had a particular impact on my life is a civil rights leader and pastor named John Perkins, who has done his work for decades in Jackson, Mississippi, and really committed his life to racial healing work through people from different backgrounds living together and serving together. And so that, in many ways, was the impetus for my wife and I to move into the East End of Richmond 20 plus years ago. And so the modeling that Dr. Perkins and his community in Jackson did, I think that has had a huge impact on our life and our commitment to this city.
Yeah, I noticed in your resume that you've gotten appointments from 2 Republican governors, which, Bob McDonnell and Glenn Youngkin may not share your political feelings exactly, but I wonder what it was like to, kind of work with the other side that closely. And did you have any relationship with either one of them? Or?
I did not. I mean, obviously do now, having served with Governor Youngkin as his Commissioner of Social Services for 2.5 years. And I think at the end of the day, right, there are clear differences between the parties, but there are also a huge bucket of things that everybody can agree on. And the work that I was doing in social services was really about creating pathways out of poverty and family stability and investing in workforce development. And like those are things that, regardless of what party you're in, that we can all look to as a societal good and say, these are the things we need to do to help the most vulnerable members of our society find pathways out. And so, I think my perspective and my attitude has always been like, we need all perspectives. We're stronger when we can bring those to bear. And it's allowed me to work in both D and R administrations, and it's allowed me to also be kind of a part of this step to run for office. I've always just kind of seen myself as a subject matter expert in the world of public health, and what drives that is really like thinking about health and well-being holistically, and what are the things and the conditions that we need to make happen to create that opportunity for everybody.
Do you hear from Youngkin much? Do you guys chat?
I've been in this job a month and a half, and we've probably seen each other 4 times. I mean, at the very beginning, he reached out and said, hey, however I can be helpful. We had breakfast, and then we see each other at events pretty regularly and get a chance to catch up.
Yeah, but it's it's an open line.
Absolutely.
Like if you wanted to ask him a question, you could pick up the phone
absolutely.
and chat. I think that's kind of rare, honestly. I mean, I don't know that many people who have been, a Democrat and have that kind of experience working for 2 Republican governors. That's kind of unusual.
I would guess that it's less rare than we think. I think that I've spent some time with the Speaker, Don Scott, recently, and I think that, his willingness to have conversations across the aisle and his relationship with the governor are good examples of just people who are doing this in real time, right? I think a lot of the legislators actually do have relationships with one another and are trying to work things out. And then, when things come to a vote, there's a whole different divide. But interpersonally, I think there's a lot more connection and agreement than I think the public at large realizes.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. I mean, I don't know if that's a Virginia thing or you think that's at the federal level too, but
yeah, I'm not so sure about the federal level.
Right. Yeah. And then sort of tell me a little bit about, I know we talked about how COVID, the was the ultimate challenge. I mean, that was sort of like what really you describe as sort of the height of crisis management and probably cultivated all those leadership skills that you were discussing. Is there any other chapter or any other portion of your life that you think prepared you to be sitting where you are right now best in terms of difficulty, in terms of like, wow, that was a difficult chapter?
I mean, my mind immediately just goes to like the first decade that we lived in the East End, when my wife and I chose to move into Churchill, and it was really motivated by this desire to live in a community where we would where we would force diversity, right? Where we would be required to be in relationship with neighbors who didn't come from the same places that we did, and so those early years we were very out of place, and like neighbors would always say, "Are you cops?" Like, because that was like the only plausible reason that we would move into that neighborhood or be regulars in that neighborhood. My wife was teaching at Chimborazo Elementary. She took a job at the school in our neighborhood, and I was in residency, and so it was an opportunity to like be in a community and to just start to build relationships and break down walls, and so that was hard work because we had to like learn a different language in many ways, like how community interacts with each other and how, what's
important.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of hard stuff that came out of that, both in, recognizing our own biases. I remember like our early engagement of our public school system and realizing that we as folks who had come from, high achieving, high education backgrounds, like wanted different things than many of my neighbors, and that wasn't wrong or bad, but we needed to recognize that we were not working to the same end, and so there was a certain humility that we had to learn in trying to do community work, and then also just being in deep relationship with people who rely on the government for services and have not always been able to get those, right? I mean, the number of conversations that I've had with neighbors trying to help them navigate the Medicaid application process or help them get access to a food pantry, in a time of crisis, and being like an educated person who's worked in government and not really able to help them, right? I mean, there's so much where I've seen through their eyes, like our systems do not work well for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I know that you have a very busy schedule, but I'm going to end on this one question, and I'm not going to allow you to give me the answer that every politician gives every time you ask this question. Okay. Whenever you ask a politician, what are your future aspirations? They always say, well, no, I'm just focused on the job I'm doing right now. I couldn't possibly have a future aspiration. I'm a politician. No, I don't have any aspirations. I'm going to stay right here and be mayor for as long as possible. You said you were surprised that you found yourself in politics. This can't be your, final resting place, right? Are there sights set? Are you thinking beyond mayor? What are your thoughts?
I mean,
don't give me the answer, Mayor.
Right,
don't give me the answer.
Catie, I mean, I love the city, right?
Yes,
and I love this work. And I think part of what brought me to this, from after having been the public health director and having been really involved in a lot of really cool work, making Richmond a better place, and then going to the state and doing really meaningful work at the state level at a significant scale, but missing like the integration of my personal and professional lives, right? Like living in the community and being able to work on projects or work on policy or create better systems that actually impacted my neighbors. Like that was really gratifying work. And so in many ways, that's what I'm really looking forward to in this role. And I'll do this role for as long as people will have me, which obviously we know, is the max of 8 years. And then I'll just find another way to serve. I mean, I'm, again, a physician, pediatrician, public health doc by background. I think that will always be a part of who I am and how I want to serve the people and serve communities. And so whether that's, something at the School of Public Health or moving over into philanthropy, I mean, I think there's a lot of avenues, but like being connected to Richmond and its story and being able to actually have my work overlap with like the relational grounding I have in the city is going to be what's most important to me.
The governor's mansion is also in Richmond. I might note. Anyway,
Catie.
just throwing that out there. Thank you so much for being with us today,
of
Mayor. I really
course.
appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay.
Great to be here.